Hello everyone, welcome to Back to Self podcast. My name is Sylwia Kuchenna. I'm psychotherapist, lecturer, author and founder of Horizon Mental Health Clinic in Limerick. Today we will cover trauma. What exactly trauma is? It seems to me that some people who have been really traumatized, they don't really use and they don't really admit that they had childhood trauma or experienced trauma. But on the other hand, trauma is such a modern word these days that loads of people overuse it. So we will look into that. We will look into the definition of trauma, how you can show up the symptoms of being traumatized, and how does it show up in everyday life. So we will cover a lot today. So get yourself comfortable. I would suggest that you get a piece of paper as well, because I will be asking some questions to help you reflect and to help you really become self-aware with this episode. So first of all, let's look at the difference between actually being traumatized and being stressed. Because if we would look at trauma is something that really change us, change how we think, change how we perceive other people, how we perceive world. Trauma disconnects us, trauma breaks us. But then on the other hand, someone might say that they have been traumatized where they really have been stressed. So for example, young people will talk to each other and they will say, oh my God, this movie really traumatized me. Or I had just a very huge test, a huge exam, and oh my God, like this exam has really traumatized me. Or they might say something like, I had a driving test. This was a traumatic experience. Well, it actually wasn't. It could be that the film, the exam, the driving test, it was stressful, but it wasn't traumatizing. Let's have that in the back of your mind. That being stressed, it's not the same as being traumatized. It's important to also remember that every traumatic experience is highly stressful, but not every stressful situation is traumatic. So just have that in mind. So if you would look at trauma is not something that happened to us, but how our body responded to it, how it registered in our body, how our body remembered what happened. So it's more about emotional memory than fact of what happened, the event itself. And that's actually what Dr. Gabor Maté said about the definition of trauma, that it's not the event, it's not what happened to us, but what happened inside us as a result of what happened to you. So really, trauma is the inner wound, is that disconnection from ourselves, from our emotional state. And it develops when our nervous system becomes overloaded, overwhelmed. Another huge, fantastic guru, Peter Levine, his definition, and he's the founder of Somatic Experiences, his definition of trauma is that trauma happens when an event is just too much, happens too sudden, too quick, too much, and our nervous system then becomes too overwhelmed. The energy of too much is being stuck in our nervous system, which prevents our body to accomplish the natural fight, freeze, and fawn response. So something gets stuck in us, like a memory, like an energy. Peter Levine also said that trauma is a fact of life. Majority of people, most of us, sooner or later will experience some kind of trauma. But we need to remember that trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. And I'm a perfect example of that. I have experienced loads of childhood trauma, developmental trauma, relational trauma. I find out that I have complex trauma, and it doesn't define me today. It's not who I am. It's not how I see myself. So having said that, we can simply say that trauma is not your fault. It wasn't your fault, but healing is absolutely your responsibility. Healing is your right, your life, your birthright. So you can heal. In fact, I would encourage you to heal from your trauma, because that's the only way to find your own freedom, to find yourself again, to find really who you are. Because what trauma does as well is that trauma really gets us stuck in the survival mode. And the worst part of it is that we don't even realize that we're surviving. We normalized the abnormality of our experiences, that now it's hard for us to accept that all of our experiences and how we respond and how we show up in life, it's actually not us. It's a result of what happened to us. It's a result of how we understand world through our experiences, through our childhood experiences. So sometimes it's very difficult to admit to ourselves, yes, I had childhood trauma. Sometimes it's hard to admit that you have been for so many years in survival mode. You have been surviving, not living. And deep down, you don't really know who you are. You think part of your personality traits, this is who you are. But in fact, they're just coping mechanisms. So for example, you might say, I'm very shy. Whether this could be your coping mechanism to something that had happened before to you, and for you to survive it, you had to be shy. You had to withdraw yourself from becoming visible. Becoming visible was too dangerous, so you hold back. And you never question it, that you just took it, oh, I'm just shy. Maybe you're not. If you would look at my own definition of trauma, in my understanding, is that something happens to us, and as a result, we are never the same. So it disconnects us from ourselves. It disconnects us from our emotions, from our intuition, from ourselves. Something breaks in us, something detached from us, and we're no longer looking for answers. We forget how to trust ourselves. Trauma is something that keeps us small. Trauma is something that makes us forget who we are. Trauma is something that makes us feel like we're out of place. We don't really belong anywhere. And that's a result of that disconnection. We never come out the same. Trauma changes us permanently. Trauma takes something away from us. And only through healing you can get that lost part of yourself back. Also, there are two categories of trauma. Trauma with a big T and trauma with a small t. So big trauma or big T trauma would be something where the victim and the offender is very much clear to distinguish. It's so huge that it's no doubt that it was actually traumatic. So for example, it could be physical and sexual abuse. It could be war. It could be assault. It could be natural disasters. It could be accident or witnessing violence. So any event that is life-threatening, that's a big T trauma. So on the other hand now, there are traumas that are way more subtle. They're not so obvious. They're not so clear, but yet it's like thousands of needles with each experience that leads you to bleed. And examples of those Needles could be constant chronic criticism, emotional neglect, loss. Sometimes it's a birth of a sibling. We are too small, we don't understand what's going on, and all of a sudden this person shows up in our life and takes our parents. Having very controlling, overbearing parents. Having parents who are not emotionally available, who are not very attuned to your emotions, who are not very attuned to your needs. Very cold, very practical parenting, very demanding parents. A parent who was mentally or physically ill. So these are just small examples. These are just some of the examples of what trauma with a small t is. But again, something like being bullied at school. At once you might think it's fine. It doesn't really impact me. But then in social gatherings, you find yourself very tense. You find yourself that you don't trust people. You find yourself that you're not very open. You find yourself that you're holding back and you prefer to observe. You don't really show your personality. So trauma develops when overwhelming experience occurs. And then that person is actually lacking external or internal support. Or it's lacking internal or external resources to cope with that event. So no support. And there is no opportunity to safely experience and process those emotions, feelings, talk about what happened, and to express yourself how you feel after what happened. Trauma also leaves limiting beliefs about ourselves, about world, about people, how we perceive world, and how we form relationships. So trauma really creates limiting beliefs in our subconscious mind. And this could be something as simple and something as innocent as a parent talking to a small child. Stop crying, you need to man up. So as a result, a child who hears something like that, like a comment like that, with judgment, with rejection, with, oh, if I cry, I'm not good enough for my parents to love me. So a child learns to drop and to suppress their own true emotional state. And as a result, they put on a mask. I'm not crying, I'm a man. So I need to man up. I need to act like a man. Men don't cry. So I can't. And that's probably one of the biggest and the heaviest burden that men carries. But that's a topic for another podcast. Yes, men, I feel you. So children like this learn to suppress their own emotional needs in order to maintain attachment or some kind of safety. But the thing is with that, over time, such experiences, such beliefs, it becomes our internal belief system. It becomes our perception of how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we see other people. And the worst part probably is that we never really get to question, why do we think the way we do? Why do we think those things? Why do I believe I can't cry? I'm not a robot. Of course I will have emotions. Of course I will want to express them. Why is it okay for me to express my laughter when I'm happy, but I can't cry when I'm sad? What's wrong with cries? What's wrong with tears? So, but we never really question that. We just take it, men don't cry, and that's okay. It's not. So how trauma shows up in our everyday life? What are the symptoms of someone being traumatized in their childhood? What are the symptoms that we don't really link to trauma? And often also doctors, they don't link those symptoms as trauma. So here's the list. Chronic anxiety, overthinking, and hypervigilance. People pleasing, difficulty setting boundaries, difficulty with saying no. Depression, sense of numbness, sense of emptiness, not really connecting, not feeling connection with anything or anyone. Addictions, compulsions. And with that, so any of our holisms, so for example, alcoholism, workaholism, shopaholism, being fixated on personal development, holism, excessive exercising, everything that we feel like we have to do, otherwise we would be enough. There is every time we feel like we have to do something, that we are afraid to slow down. We are afraid that if we wouldn't do that one thing, we might not be enough. We might not be good enough. Every time we have to do something out of fear. Again, with compulsions, it could be food, work, relationships, sex, shopping, anything. Difficulty trusting others, difficulty with intimacy, fear of becoming dependent, fear of relationships, imposter syndrome, or chronic inner critic. So we're constantly criticizing ourselves. We're constantly on check. How am I? How do I feel about this? This is not good enough. Trouble relaxing or feeling safe. Health issues. And just to name few of them, of course, number one is autoimmune disorders, chronic pains, back pains, insomnia, asthma, and skin problems. So all of that, high blood pressure, heart disease, all of that is closely linked with trauma. It's so interesting. I had few patients who came to me because of their skin conditions, and often we never even touched on the skin problems as such. Once I was asking questions, after a few sessions, it was actually very clear that they had childhood trauma. And once we started to work on that and starting the healing process of childhood trauma, the skin got cleared. And never once I actually asked detailed questions about their treatment, about what they do and what they don't do. Because at this point, when someone who has visited so many doctors about their skin problems, they actually know more than I do when it comes to their skin and the procedures and the treatment, more than I would know. So there's no point of me asking, and because I would probably say something completely basic that you have tried 3 years ago and it didn't work. So I do respect your knowledge as well. So again, I'm not the expert on the skin. I'm the expert on trauma. Here's actually another very interesting fact, that people who have been actually traumatized, they don't admit that they have been. Number one, they don't even realize that they had childhood trauma, and that person was definitely me. Or my therapist 2 years ago told me, Sylwia, do you realize you actually have childhood trauma? And there's a lot of childhood trauma. I looked at her like she makes up the patience. And I said, no, I don't see that. I don't have childhood trauma. That's all what I know. So I don't know where you get your trauma thing from, but definitely that's not me. So interesting, because then she asked me to do a test, and when I did the test, I scored 8 out of 10 on complex trauma. So I could not deny it then. Yeah, so I understand completely how people would not know, would not see that their experiences, it was actually their trauma. I understand, and I can see through my own experiences how people don't really link their own experiences and how they don't see it as trauma. Sure, that's all what we knew. We just learned to cope with it. So it's real. Another reason why people might not admit that they had childhood trauma is that they compare their own pain. And we always say something like, sure, but such and such had a worse. So what am I here to complain about? My childhood wasn't as bad. I had the roof and they didn't have even electricity. What are you on about? People had it worse. I'm fine. It's very common. This links with what I already said. We normalize the dysfunction of our experiences of our lives. So something that we once experienced, we never question it. If anything, we would question ourselves. Oh, there must be something wrong with me if this is what happened to me. Rather than, wait a minute, this environment is actually abnormal. We don't do that. Especially we don't do it as children because we long for attachment, safety, and love. Another reason why we are afraid of trauma is that we are afraid what it actually means. We are afraid of the pain that it will bring. We are afraid that we will be angry and resentful towards our parents. We are afraid that all of our relationships all of a sudden will break. We are afraid that we won't be the same. And here I'm going to stop you for a second. Based on my own experience and experience of my patients, strong relationships, the healthy, meaningful relationships, those relationships will get even better. They will become even more stronger. They will become even more healthier. They will become more safer, and they will feel amazing. But there will be relationships, there will be people when you will be ready to let go as a result of your healing, simply because they will not match you anymore. They will no longer be able to manipulate you, and they might walk away. You might actually see more of their own manipulations. You might actually see that this relationship is not working anymore for you. So why would you hold to people out of fear whether your relationship with yourself will become much more healthier? So if your relationship with yourself is healing and you're respecting yourself more, that means you would not accept less than what you're giving yourself. So if you're starting to respect yourself, you would not accept disrespect from someone else. It's simple as that. Sometimes we feel ashamed to admit that we have been traumatized. Sometimes we are afraid that, oh my God, if I will say that I have trauma, people might reject me, people might not like me, people will start seeing me in a different way. Again, it's not your responsibility how people will react to what you say, to your own truth. As long as you're able to own it and hold that truth, that this was your experience, whether they like it or not, this is how you felt, then the shame is no longer there as such, because the secrecy is no longer feeding that shame. And lastly, sometimes we don't feel we deserving the label of trauma, because I don't think I'm that important to feel like I can say that I have trauma. Sure, I don't matter, like my experience don't matter. It's okay. We are afraid to admit that we had trauma because we don't feel almost deserving of that label. We don't feel like we can say we had trauma because it will bring too much attention around us. And no, people will think we're just attention seekers. No. But here is the truth. It takes huge courage to look inside yourself and to admit that you have childhood trauma. It takes huge courage to start healing yourself, to seeking change. Because there's only one direction. With healing, there's only one direction. With therapy, there's only one direction. And that direction is to pain. Back to self. But back to self road, it's through pain. So one direction, through pain, through discomfort, but the purpose is to come back to self, to get to know yourself really, to free yourself and to have a different meaning of that pain. Because the pain that you're going to feel in therapy, this pain will be different because it will empower you. This pain will no longer feed your fears. In fact, it will encourage you. It will help you see your own strengths. It will help you see what you have already survived. And that kind of pain is freedom. Because you're no longer going to be afraid. You're no longer going to be afraid of yourself. You're no longer going to be afraid of your emotions. So the pain won't be as huge. It won't be bigger than you are. And you will realize that. So here are some questions for you, just to reflect and just to see if you had any childhood trauma. So ask yourself, do you ever feel overwhelmed by your emotions? Do I struggle with intimacy, boundaries, and trust? What's my relationship with myself and others? Is there a harsh inner voice? Do I avoid certain situations, places, conversations, people? Do I often feel like I'm not good enough? Do I sabotage things that are going too well? Have I adapted to be hyper independent or hyper pleasing? So hopefully those questions will help you recognize whether you, in your adulthood, acting out of your survival mode, because these questions are just going to help you identify whether you're in survival mode or not. All of those questions are helping you recognize your own coping mechanism and what you had to do to survive. Let me give you some examples about how trauma can actually show up in our adulthood. How do we really act? So, very successful entrepreneur who works 80 hours a week is afraid to slow down, is afraid to take an annual leave because slowing down feels threatening. Imagine a doctor who is constantly overworked, who works and helps and feels good in the work, is tired, but neglects their own tiredness and constantly is there for her or his patients. Why? Because they need to feel needed. Their escape, their work is their escapism. They feel safe, they feel needed, they have a position, it feels safe. Another example, a man who is very charming in public, but struggles with emotional intimacy, emotional closeness in relationships. A parent who becomes very angry when a child cries for too long, or when a child makes a mistake and the parent reacts, oh my god, why did you do this? Will you just stop? Will you just be careful? What were you thinking? So this kind of reaction is automatic. You don't give yourself time to think, okay, you did that. Do you want me to help you? Okay, just make sure the glass isn't broken. Just make sure you're okay. Oh, let's do this together. Let's clean up together. Not a big deal. It's okay. So ask yourself, how do you react? Do you give yourself a few seconds to actually respond, or is your response automatic? Another example would be a person who constantly avoids medical appointments out of shame, out of lack of trust, out of I'm not going to anyone telling me what I should take and what I should not take. I'm fine. Or there's a deep belief that the doctors, they can't be trusted. Or there is a shame around, oh my god, I'm going to a doctor, there's something wrong with me. Or it could be a deep belief, oh my god, if I'm going to doctor, I'm dying. Another example, someone who says yes to everything, but then feels constantly burned out. So no boundaries, no looking after their own needs. In fact, they don't even know what their needs are. They don't know what they need. Another example, and that's probably another topic for another podcast, is women who forget to be feminine. So another truth about trauma is that we have certain emotions, we have certain behaviors, certain limiting beliefs that we, number one, are not aware of. Number two, it's completely survival mechanism. It has nothing to do with our personality. Number three, it's part of our masks. We mask who we truly are. We mask our emotional wounds in order to keep ourselves safe. We don't believe that people would make us feel safe. We don't believe world is a safe world. It's a safe space. So in fact, we are creating a safe space for us. But here is the point. At what cost? At what cost? Healing trauma is never a solo journey, because when trauma happens, it's always relational. It always involves the third party. It always involves someone else. So to heal trauma and to heal it effectively and safely, that's the big underline red marker, safely, it's a huge aspect, because trauma makes us forget about safety. You need someone who is attuned with you, who is able to see you beyond your survival mode, who is able to see you beyond your masks. So this is where a skilled therapist who works with the unconsciousness as well in therapy is able to cut those unconscious reactions, those unconscious thoughts, those unconscious reactions. So if you're ever going to heal yourself, which I would encourage you to do, make sure you do the research and find someone who is specialized in trauma. Now, having said that, if you look at trauma-informed therapists, make sure they actually have more than 12-week certificate. You want something more experienced when it comes to your own healing. So again, trauma was never your fault, but healing is your responsibility. In here, I will give you a few options from myself. So one option will be to download my trauma quiz. So there's a few questions and then you get a result, and I will help you identify what kind of trauma you have. Another resource that you can download as well for free is Inner Child 3-day masterclass. So it's for free. You can look into it, connect with your inner child, because inner child is very much closely linked to your subconscious mind, to your childhood trauma and childhood experiences. So that's another thing for free. If you feel like you'd want more, I encourage you to get my book, Trauma Through the Inner Child Eyes. Fantastic read when it comes to trauma. Very easy, very well explained what trauma is. So I encourage you to get that book as well. And of course, you can join myself on the inner child workshops that I'm doing from time to time. So check out the dates, and if it suits you, go for it. If you have any questions, let me know as well. So right now, I would like to thank you very much for being here, for listening. If you feel like this content is useful, please subscribe to the channel. It will help me hugely. If you have any questions, any thoughts, message me or leave a comment. I'll be very looking forward to reading them all. I see you with the next episode. Bye!